There's some people that say that cats have 9 lives. This true story may prove that to be the case. There was a cat, Oscar, later famed as Unsinkable Sam, but he was no ordinary ship's cat. He wasn't just a bundle of whiskers and furs aboard a warship. He was a feline survivor with the kind of luck that would make a rabbit's foot jealous. During World War II, Oscar managed to outlast not 1, not 2, but 3 sinkings, earning him a place as a maritime legend. It all began aboard the formidable German battleship Bismarck in May of 1941. Though we'll never know what Oscar's original name was, perhaps it was Hans or even Klaus. One thing's certain, he found himself in the middle of a very unfortunate situation. As Bismarck embarked on her first and only mission, Oscar's pals were firmly on the deck, blissfully unaware that his adventure was about to take a watery turn. On May 24, 1941, in the icy waters of North Atlantic, the German battleship Bismarck was preparing for battle. Her crew of over 2,100 men moved with precision and focus, knowing they were about to face the might of the British Royal Navy. Among the crew, unnoticed and unaware of the significance of the day, was a black and white cat, a simple stowaway with no idea his life was about to be forever changed. Bismarck had been dispatched on her mission to disrupt British supply convoys crossing the Atlantic. But the British had caught wind of her presence, and now 2 of their finest warships, HMS Hood and HMS Prince of Wales, were closing in fast. The skies above were heavy with mist, and the tension in the air was palpable as the Bismarck's lookouts spotted the enemy ships cutting through the gray expanse of water. The Battle of the Denmark Straits erupted in a fury of gunfire. Bismarck's massive 15-inch guns unleashed their devastating force, sending shockwaves through the sea. The battle was fierce, with shells exploding on both fleets, plumes of water and flames rising from the ocean in the chaos. The cat moved unnoticed, clinging to whatever shelter it could find on the deck. Then catastrophe struck. A German shell hit the HMS Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy, igniting her aft magazine in a massive explosion that tore the ship apart. In seconds, the Hood was gone, her wreckage sinking rapidly, and with her, all but 3 of her 1,418 crew. The Royal Navy, at once so confident, was stunned, but they weren't done yet. The Prince of Wales continued the fight, landing several hits on the Bismarck, one of which critically damaged her fuel tanks. The Germans knew they couldn't continue. With their fuel leaking into the sea, they turned south, making for the safety of occupied France. But Bismarck was now a hunted ship. For 2 days she streamed across the Atlantic, trying to evade the British fleet that had been railing to bring her down. It was a desperate race. On May 26, British reconnaissance aircraft from HMS Ark Royal spotted Bismarck and launched an attack. The torpedo planes screamed through the air, braving a hail of anti-aircraft fire to strike their target. One torpedo hit the ship's rudder, jamming it, and the Bismarck was left almost helpless, turning slowly in circles in the open ocean. As dawn broke on May 27th, the British fleet closed in for the kill. HMS King George V and HMS Rodney opened fire, unleashing a relentless barrage on the crippled battleship. Hour after hour, Bismarck was pounded by heavy shells, her guns silenced, her decks ablaze. The end was inevitable. At 10:39 a.m., with Bismarck a flaming wreck, the Germans took their fate into their own hands. They scuttled the ship, setting explosives to ensure it sank before the British could capture it. Slowly, the once mighty Bismarck slipped beneath the waves, taking with her over 2,000 crew members. Only 115 would survive. Yet somehow our plucky cat was spotted by the British destroyer HMS Cossack, casually floating on a piece of debris like he was on summer holiday. With no clue what his name might have been, the crew decided to christen him Oscar, after the International Code of Signals for Man Overboard. It was a fitting name for the cat, whose hobby seemed to be falling into the ocean and surviving. By October 1941, HMS Cossack had become home to the black and white cat man named Oscar, who had been pulled from the wreckage of the mighty Bismarck just months before. Life aboard Cossack had returned to its usual rhythm as the destroyer patrolled the Mediterranean and North Atlantic, escorting convoys through treacherous waters. The crew had grown fond of their feline companion, who prowled the deck like a veteran sailor, his whiskers twitching at the scent of salty breeze. But on October 24th, 1941, the sea had other plans. The skies above were dull gray as the Cossack led a convoy from Gibraltar to Britain, slicing through the choppy waters of the Atlantic. Below the surface, however, unseen predator lurked. The German submarine U-563 had been stalking the convoy, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It came like a thief in the night, swift and without warning. A torpedo ripped through the Cossack's hull with a thunderous explosion, tearing away nearly a third of the ship. The deck buckled under the force, the air filled with smoke, screams, and acrid stench of burning metal. Chaos erupted as the crew scrambled to respond, the ship groaning as water poured into the gaping wound in its side. The sea rushed in with an unstoppable fury. Oscar, caught in the mayhem, clung to a rail, his eyes wide as the ship lurched violently. His instinct told him that something was terribly wrong, but there was no escaping the relentless onslaught. The once proud destroyer, now mortally wounded, struggled to stay afloat. The crew fought to contain the damage, but the toll was immediate and devastating. 159 men were killed in the blast. As the ship listed in the swelling waters, Cossack's remaining crew members worked desperately to keep her afloat. Oscar, somehow still unharmed, watched as the scene unfolds. As lifeboats were lowered into the water, the crew knew their time was running out. They had no choice but to call for help. A British destroyer, the HMS Legion, arrived to assist, towing the crippled Cossack toward Gibraltar. For a moment there was hope that the ship and all those aboard her might be saved, but the ocean had other ideas. The weather worsened, waves battering the already shattered hull. The tow line was abandoned. Cossack, unable to fight the elements any longer, began to sink into the dark waters. On October 27, just days after the torpedo struck, Cossack disappeared beneath the waves, joining Bismarck in the depths of the Atlantic. 159 sailors lost their lives in the explosion, but somehow Oscar managed to escape unscathed. It was as if the Grim Reaper simply couldn't catch him. The survivors, including Oscar, were transferred to Legion. The men were exhausted, their faces grim as they watched the ship slip away, but Oscar, ever resilient, found his way to a safe spot, settling in as if nothing had happened. He was, after all, unsinkable Sam now, a creature who, no matter what, seemed destined to stay afloat. For Oscar, this was just the second chapter of his remarkable story, one that would see him endure yet another shipwreck before his days at sea were finally over. But as Cossack vanished into the ocean's embrace, Oscar once again had survived where so many had not. Oscar, probably rolling his eyes at this point, was transferred to the safety of dry land in Gibraltar, but his adventures were far from over. After the sinking of the HMS Cossack, Oscar, now known by his nickname Unsinkable Sam, had found himself aboard another British warship, this time the mighty carrier HMS Ark Royal. The crew welcomed the ship's lucky mascot, treating him with a mix of admiration and superstition. After all, he had survived 2 shipwrecks already, and if there was any hope of surviving the same fate, perhaps the resilient black and white cat held some of it. For months, Ark Royal prowled the Mediterranean, conducting vital operations against Axis forces. She had played a crucial role in damaging the Bismarck, the ship where Oscar's journey had begun, and now carried him across the sea as part of her crew. Yet, despite the confidence that came with being aboard one of Britain's finest carriers, fate had not yet finished with Sam, or the men who sailed with him. On November 14, 1941, disaster struck again. U-81, a German submarine, had been stalking Ark Royal as she returned from Malta, her sleek shadow gliding beneath the surface. The moment the submarine's captain had been waiting for arrived in the late afternoon. U-81 launched a torpedo that sliced through the water, striking Ark Royal with a sickening thud. The explosion rocked the massive carrier, sending shudders through the deck and reverberating deep into the bowels of the ship. Chaos erupted as the crew scrambled to assess the damage. Oscar, ever alert, darted across the deck, weaving through the legs of sailors as the ship began to dangerously list to one side. Though the torpedo didn't cause an immediate sinking, it inflicted catastrophic damage. The Ark Royal's rudder and propulsions were crippled, and despite desperate attempts to save her, it was clear that she would not survive the night. The sea poured in through the ruptured hull. and the ship began to settle lower in the water. Rescue efforts were swift, and thanks to the slow rate of sinking, nearly all of the Ark Royal's crew were evacuated safely. As men clambered into lifeboats, Oscar was plucked from the deck by a crewman and brought aboard a motor launch. The cat's fur was damp, his ears were flat against his head, but as he clung to a floating plank, he was described as angry but quite unharmed. There he was, once again surviving yet another shipwreck, while the Ark Royal, now beyond saving, slowly rolled over and disappeared beneath the waves 30 miles off the coast of Gibraltar. The survivors, including Oscar, were transferred to HMS Legion, the same ship that had aided in the rescue after the Cossack's sinking. For the third time, Sam had found himself aboard a ship after a deadly encounter with the sea, and for the third time he had survived. At this point, even the most superstitious sailors had to admit that Sam had earned his nickname. After surviving 3 shipwrecks, the powers that be decided that was enough. Sam's days of playing with fate on the high seas were over, and he was officially retired from naval duty. He was sent to the first governor's office in Gibraltar, perhaps as sort of a bureaucratic cat in residence, before being shipped back to the United Kingdom. There, Sam spent the remainder of his life in the comfort of a sailor's home in Belfast, where no one dared take him near a boat again. Sam lived peacefully until his death in 1955, his 9 lives finally spent. But his memory lives on, not just in the hearts of those who knew him, but in a pastel portrait by Georgina Shaw Baker, now housed in the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. It's a fitting tribute to the cat who refused to sink, even when everything around him did.